Welcome to Endgame, a production of Universal Spirit Broadcasting Network. I'm your host, Father Rick Romero, and thank you for viewing this program. Please keep this ministry in your prayers. Your input and comments are appreciated. My email address is rvromerosr@gmail.com. No spaces, all lowercase, rvromerosr@gmail.com. With this episode, we continue with part 2 of Birmingham Rules. Mahatma Gandhi stated, "If we are to reach real peace in this world, and if we are to carry on a real war against war, we shall have to begin with the children." In 1963, Birmingham was Alabama's biggest city, and most considered it the baddest as well. Segregation in Birmingham was the rule of law. The black children of Birmingham felt oppressed at every turn, and in the spring of 1963, they played a vital role in restoring humanity to themselves and to a race-divided America. In a church service in March of 1963, the children of Birmingham answered Dr. King's call for volunteers to stand for human dignity and desegregation of Birmingham schools, restaurants, and places of business. On May 2, 1963, about 1,000 students marched and went to jail in protest of segregation in Birmingham. By May 10th, 3,000 students were arrested. Their actions created a pivotal event in the civil rights movement that would expose to the nation and to the world the dehumanization of Birmingham Rules. For a few moments, ponder these 3 questions. What spurred thousands of children to action? What gave them the power to rebel and resist? And how is it that children of all ages were the ones to garner the largest victory seen this far in the civil rights movement? Answers to these questions are found in a few quick excerpts taken from The Children's March, which is an inspiring 45-minute documentary produced by Mighty Times Productions. The documentary features recollections from individuals who were the children participating in the march 50 years ago, and I believe they have the answers to your questions.
Birmingham, Alabama, 1963. It was the most racist, most segregated city in the South. On April 12, 1963, Martin Luther King left his room at the Gaston Motel and walked 2 blocks to the 16th Street Baptist Church, where a gathering of protesters joined him for a march on City Hall. He had targeted Birmingham as the site for mass demonstrations against segregation, but the masses had failed to materialize, and King decided to go to jail himself. The nation watched quietly as King was placed in solitary confinement.
Birmingham, to be perfectly honest, was a grim place through the eyes of African Americans.
It was the most rigid, the most violent, the most vicious.
It was the biggest and baddest city in the South. We nicknamed it Birmingham.
Well, Birmingham is a symbol of hardcore resistance to integration.
I always worked under this philosophy: you can never whip these boys if you don't keep you and them separate.
Under Bull Connor, Birmingham was the closest thing in America to a police state.
So the theory was,
We need to bring all this out in the open.
Dr. King had gone to jail in hopes that thousands of protesters would follow his example and overwhelm the system. But it didn't work out that way. The blacks of Birmingham stayed home, and the press quickly lost interest.
When the children were in jail, the people were pulling them. Dr. King, my daughter in jail. Dr. King, my son in jail. Dr. King, what we gonna do? I mean, parents just all around him talking about their children in jail. Just as calm, just as nice.
Don't worry about your children. They are going to be all right. Don't hold them back if they want to go to jail. For they are doing a job for all of America and for all mankind.
Although many have been arrested, we have already won a victory here in Birmingham. Because yesterday we filled up the jail, and today we filled up the jail yard, and on tomorrow, I don't know what they're gonna do.
By Tuesday, May 7th, the city of Birmingham faced a state of collapse. 3,000 students were stampeding through downtown in a victory lap. The police had been made helpless.
Kids was everywhere, you know what I mean? All down through town.
We couldn't stop it. We couldn't contain it.
The white people were in panic.
They didn't know what to do. They'd turn you loose.
By the seventh day of demonstrations, it became obvious there was no end of children in sight.
I was sitting there in the jail and I said, no way to hold a lid on this. The fear's gone.
There were 72 hours of intense negotiations. Movement leaders and white officials were up until dawn with an open line to the White House.
I'm very happy to be able to announce that we have come today to the climax of the long struggle for justice, freedom, and human dignity in the city of Birmingham.
After more than 5,000 arrests, the white people of Birmingham had finally agreed to integrate, and the state courts removed Bull Connor after 7 terms in office.
Well, folks, it's official. Mr. Bull Connor is out of a job.
Hello, my fellow Americans. This is ENDGAME'S Field Correspondent Tony Herrera reporting. In our first message, we alluded to the fact that our country has started on a path of no return, and that once taken will affect us for generations to come. Terrorism has replaced communism and continued our war footing and global ambitions. In these podcasts, we will show how this has happened and what the implications are for us and our loved ones here at home, and more importantly, what we must do to change the direction we're heading in. The dilemma our country is facing will require that all those of good conscience take their positions on the front line and lead the efforts to turn the tide against the forces of evil that have cloaked themselves in the mantle of righteousness. To do so, we must first dissect with precision how we are being manipulated as a country and how the deception is being played out, so that we can understand with equal precision what it will take to get us out of this situation. Like a complex jigsaw puzzle, we need to identify the pieces and put each of them in their place in order to see the broader agenda that has been set into motion. These pieces represent facts. Let's establish the facts. Fact 1. The U.S. birth rate is on a decline. The rate of new U.S.-born babies that will grow up and join the domestic labor market are not enough to offset those that are aging out of the workforce. The New York Times, in a July 3rd, 2017 article, reported this in an article titled, U.S. Fertility Rate Reaches a Record Low. In his 2005 report on the state of the U.S. economy, then-President Bush projected that by the year 2015, the replacement rate will have reached a negative number. It was then that he proposed a massive guest worker program as a means to prepare for this eventuality in meeting our nation's labor needs. Older workers are retiring at the rate of 10,000 a day. Fact 2, labor shortages have spread across the country. On April of 2016, the entrepreneur website marketplace.org wrote a little noticed article titled 15 Years of Labor Shortages Predicted for the U.S. Economy. In May of 2017, the New York Times reported this shortage in a report titled Lack of Workers, Not Work, Weighs on the Nation's Economy. And in January of this year, CNN Money published a report titled American Businesses Can't Find Workers. While these may seem like simple, mundane reports, they are at the core of the strategy being played out against us and our country. It explains why Trump has put so much emphasis on the presence of millions of illegal immigrants and votes. Fact 3. The future of our country and our economy is dependent on immigrant labor. Like it or not, the ongoing presence of immigrant workers is and will continue to be an ongoing feature of our country. Fact 4. We need to plan for the incorporation of millions of immigrant workers into our present workforce. Here now is where the facts become muddled with the perceptions that most Americans have. We need immigrant labor. Most of our older retired workers, and even ourselves personally, will most likely be cared for by immigrant workers when we are old and require help. This poses this question: if we know we need and we require immigrant labor workers to ensure our future as a country, why is there such a hostile attitude about immigrants in our country? This will become the topic of our next report, which will build off of this one and cover the topics: why America does not have enough legal immigrant workers to satisfy our industry needs, and why we have so many undocumented immigrant workers in our current workforce. Knowing the answer to these questions will enable us to begin to see the broader picture and the trap that our country is walking into. Until our next segment, guest workers, the solution to our problems or the beginning of the end of our country as we know it. This is Tony Herrera signing off.
From his prison cell in solitary confinement, Dr. King composes a response to Birmingham's clergy who were critical of King's leadership and his lack of moral responsibility in following the rule of law. In his Birmingham letter, Dr. King methodically addresses their disapproval with inspired spiritual wisdom and stirring insight. Dr. King begins his discourse by first addressing their anxiety over his disregard and disrespect for the rule of law. He starts with these acknowledgments. You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern. Tactfully, Dr. King points out the paradoxical practice Southern clergy have with the rule of law regarding segregation. Dr. King recounts the rule of law. Since we so diligently urge people to obey the Supreme Court's decision of 1954 outlawing segregation in the public schools, at first glance, it may seem rather paradoxical for us consciously to break laws. One may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. One has not only a legal, but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. I believe Dr. King's Birmingham Letters give us timeless guidelines about how to define just and unjust laws. As we look at these principles of fairness and justice, ponder them and ask yourself if you believe our current lawmakers in Congress, the Senate, and the White House are following the principles described by Dr. King. From his jail cell in solitary confinement, Dr. King asserts these tenets for just and unjust laws. A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. An unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal and natural law. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality. An unjust law is a code that a numerical or power majority group compels a minority group to obey, but does not make binding on itself. By the same token, a just law is a code that a majority compels a minority to follow and that it is willing to follow itself. One who breaks an unjust law must do so openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for law. Today, there are individuals who are legislating policies and laws that are the same form of segregation that was being enforced in Birmingham. As he degrades the human personality, President Trump proposes laws and policies that create a state of segregation. President Trump's proposed border wall between the United States and Mexico is segregation. President Trump's travel ban against selected Islamic nations is segregation. President Trump's banning transgender military is segregation. President Trump's proposed immigration reform is segregation. In his response to Birmingham's clergy, Dr. King declares, "All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality." We close this episode of Endgame with excerpts taken from a video report produced by the British Broadcasting Company entitled Missing. Their report focuses on the damaging impact immigration sweeps are creating in a small fishing community in Washington state. Sudden immigration sweeps and ramped up deportations created a scene that is similar to an episode of The Twilight Zone. Residents of Long Beach, Washington were discovering that friends, classmates, co-workers, and neighbors were suddenly disappearing. After several weeks and months, they learned their abrupt vanishing was because of their immigration status. The report concludes with the sheriff of Pacific County attesting to the inequity and injustice of what is happening to his county. I believe the sheriff would agree with Dr. King and St. Augustine. An unjust law is no law at all.
Consider myself very politically conservative. I thought it sounded great. I mean, you break the law, by golly, and then when you actually, for me, you start, wait a minute. This year, what we've noticed is a lot of people who have been in our community for a number of years have been arrested and detained by ICE. We're talking people that have been here sometimes 10, 12, even more years. So it's impacting the fisheries, the cannery workers, the cranberry bogs. So I don't know what they're going to do. I have no idea what they're going to do. Those are all very much heavily dependent upon migrant workers. But even more so than that, I think people have just been emotionally in turmoil because they've seen people that they've known for years, friends, acquaintances, neighbors, people that have gone to church with, those kind of things, kids are in school together, are just gone. The turning point for me was a guy that I've known for many years who I found out last summer was picked up. And I didn't know he was here illegally, to be honest with you, but I was like, they picked up Mario?
So I wasn't surprised at all because since this new administration started, everyone is going to be detained. But then I knew that they were going to focus only in criminals. I'm sure I'm not a criminal. I'm not one of those.
I mean, he's somebody that you'd want to have in your country. He's somebody that's adding to, in a very positive way, our community. And you cannot tell me that our community is better off, or that the United States is better off because Mario has been shipped back to Mexico. It's easy to hear sound bites and say, yes, that's great policy. It's different when you're implementing it and you start seeing, now wait a minute, this is actually affecting these people's lives, and that I didn't sign up for this. And shame on me for being short-sighted about it. Okay, I mean, fine, but it's not just. It's not just.